Let's start by reading the passage. It's Matthew 10, verses 16 to 25. I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. Be on your guard. You will be handed over to local councils and be flogged in the synagogues. On my account you'll be brought before governors and kings as witnesses to them and to the Gentiles. But when they arrest you, do not worry about what to say or how to say it. At that time you will be given what to say. For it will not be you speaking, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child. Children will rebel against their parents and have them put to death. You will be hated by everyone because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. When you are persecuted in one place, flee to another. Truly I tell you, you will not finish going through the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. The student is not above the teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for students to be like their teachers and servants like their masters. If the head of the house has been called Beelzebul, how much more the members of his household? We're going to start with a story called Home. It was the year 1721, in the age when the life of merchant sailors was wild, adventurous and profitable. One such merchant, we'll call him Thomas, had recently bought a house. He'd grown up dirt poor, in a dirt poor port on the English coast. And he'd never had his own place before, and now he had an entire building, though it didn't feel at all like home. His work specialised in risky trades, importing new cloths and fabrics to the wealthy. Early in his life it had been disastrous, and he'd almost ended up destitute. He was actually quite a trusting and naive individual for one engaged in such cutthroat deals. But now things were much better, and he was selling cotton, calico, fustian, muslin and wool all across the northern provinces. So much so that for the first time in his life, he was able to get somewhere to live bigger than a bunk on a broken down ship. It is universally acknowledged that moving somewhere new is the most stressful process anyone actually chooses to go through. It is alluring to dream of a new life, a fresh start, an escape to the sun, or just an escape from your neighbours. You move all your worldly possessions in a rickety wagon somewhere completely new. Maybe 75% of those possessions actually make it. 25% probably fall off on a dirt road or get dumped in the sea. But with whatever actually arrives with you, you land in a place you've not slept in before, nor eaten your breakfast in. And this nest is now yours. But to Thomas, his nest certainly did not feel like his. It didn't even feel like he really belonged there. So settled and still. Perhaps the issue was that it wasn't swaying on the sea. It was in the countryside, in a small village, away from the sounds of shipyards and coastal pubs. He bought it to escape all that life, now that he actually could, but more and more it felt like maybe that was a mistake. Sailors should stay on water, he thought. A few weeks into living there, he got footloose, and Thomas went on a trip. He locked up his new house and left it somewhere near dawn. He rode to the city, stayed a night, and then made the several days trek to a port where an old friend was setting sail. It was many months before Thomas returned back to the countryside. When he did, he came on the road up from the city about 5 p.m. as the sun was already setting. He didn't want to go back to his house at all. He was already ready to leave again. Thomas had heard that when you go away from your new dwelling for the first time, and then later you arrive back and find that your house is still there, you really know it's yours. Thomas thought that sage advice was probably for people who used to living on land. His homes were usually a lot less reliably fixed. So, instead, he went to the pub. He rode through the mist and promised himself that after a night, he'd go away again on some other voyage. He wasn't sticking around here. It was midnight before he finally left the King's Head, clutching at the small candle that the landlord had given him to find his way home. Thomas was still a little unsure of the streets of the village, but he knew it couldn't be more than half an hour's walk up to his house. So he left his horse and strode out beyond the now pitch-black pub, navigating only foot by foot from the light of this vulnerable flame outstretched before him. Thomas's eyes had to strain through the dark because there was no moon and it was a clouded sky. There were no torchlights in the street, nor even homes with fires in them. He could barely see 2 steps ahead of him. And then, about 5 minutes in, like a thief, a small gust of wind whipped across his body and the candle went out. It was gone, and with it the whole universe turned completely dark. Thomas couldn't see his hand in front of his face, nor his feet beneath him. There were sounds of an owl, but otherwise absolutely nothing. He couldn't turn back, he couldn't see the pub anymore. He had no idea where his house was. This man was a great navigator of immense oceans, but he literally couldn't cross this village, it was so dark. Thomas actually couldn't even move. The world and all its living people, to him alone, had entirely disappeared. Right, we're going to pause there for a moment. What does home mean to you? What does home mean to you? You've got about 5 or 6 minutes for that, or 10 minutes if your group is a little bit larger. What does home mean to you? Chat about it in your group. Go round. What does home mean to you? Let's get back to the story. Now, unable to proceed any further, Thomas sat down in the dark. He felt the cobbles beneath him. They were cold and damp. But after a while, Thomas stretched out and, knowing he could do nothing else, decided he would stay still and just await first light. He dozed restlessly and his thoughts drifted into memory. He was not sure whether he was awake or asleep, and he remembered only 3 weeks earlier looking out from the Dutch coast at the stars. Then his memory spooled out and unravelled further. He imagined again that first night when he was 16 years old below deck when the ship left harbour. For the first time he was going out from home. Then he thought further back of his dinners in his childhood home, where scraps of fish that his father collected at the end of the day made their meal. Then he recalled growing up in bitter winters at port, that day waiting for his father to return, but never seeing him again. The gloom in the village seemed to contrast with the colourful clarity of these memories. And then Thomas started to dream. He dreamt of high and violent seas around Africa's southern tip on the Cape of Good Hope. And then in a kind of vision-like state, he looked over the water in this dream and saw an angel walking on a wave's crest towards him. The angel said nothing but smiled, and Thomas knew he was safe. But then it spoke and said, "Even a sailor has a home in Jesus Christ." Then Thomas woke. It wasn't even dawn. In fact, it was a lot later. It was bright and it was sunny, and he quickly noticed he was completely surrounded by very visible locals. There was no mist, nor dark, nor night any longer, and a baker was craning over him, staring to see if this possible vagabond was drunk. A local weaver pushed through the crowd and muttered something about new people always being strange. A young woman stuck out her hand and helped Thomas up. She walked him through the people that had formed in the street. Taking him to his door, she left, saying if he needed anything, he was to stop by the watermill where she worked. Thomas thanked her. He then put out his hand to his door and, unlocking it, went in. He stopped at the threshold and stood, a little dumbstruck by what he'd experienced over that night and what he'd experienced in the street. And in the hallway, facing a large and curving stairway, he placed his hand on the wooden wall beside him. He turned up his cuffs and picked up his many letters, which were red stamped under his feet. He stood in his threshold, holding the letters, and he felt different. He felt something like a peace he hadn't felt in a long time, something like a settling in his soul, and he looked up at the stained glass bay window at the landing. And there was a crucifix in that stained glass, suspended above a luminous green water. Even a sailor can find a home, Thomas thought. Maybe even me? Jesus had no place to lay his head, the Bible tells us. The God of the universe was born into squalor, grew up in a poor tradesman's house, and relied on others to put a roof over his head during his years of teaching and ministry. But he is the one in whom we can all find a home. The passage we're looking at this week in Matthew 10, I think, shows the stark divide between the promise of security, belonging, and rest in Jesus, and the struggle of life, hounded, unsettled, and even persecuted following him. That tension between those two, between the offer of healing and a home, with the struggle and uncertainty and even homelessness of real life on mission, is a tension I don't think can easily be resolved. And in some ways, I don't want to resolve it for you. We'll all have to work out what this means for us individually in our present moment, in our culture, and in our church. Jesus is saying that in this life, it will not be without difficulty and challenge following him, but you will have everything you need. He says you're going to lose everything, but also find it all in him. I think we all do have a longing for home. Like Thomas the merchant sailor, this can mean we travel far and wide to find that sense of belonging or even feel at home in ourselves. But that journey doesn't always arrive where we expect. Sometimes our wanderlust and our travel can be dissatisfying. How many gap years really help people to learn truly who they are? Do you not know who you are if you didn't travel in the foothills of the Peruvian mountains for 6 months? One of my favourite poems is by T.S. Eliot, and let me get you a passage from it. He says, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." In the passage we're looking at in Matthew, Jesus is saying that a life following him can literally mean having to move from place to place to escape harm, as Christians in the Middle East have been experiencing for many years now. It can mean disruption. It can mean a break from the past and a revolution in who we are and our family and society around us. It is a life of ultimate vulnerability and dependence on him. And for the disciples he's talking to, this isn't a bar to be attained to show how we are good Christians or that they are good followers. It's a mark of the way, a reality of the road. And in all of it, Jesus is saying, you don't even have to worry what you'll say before kings and rulers and courts. You can be content in every circumstance because you are his ambassadors, his advocates, his very own adopted children. And he's not going anywhere. He's right there with you, making his home in you. This passage for me represents a tension between that promise of home and that promise of struggle and even homelessness. It is part of the course. If you want to know more about Christians experiencing persecution now, maybe look at the Bishop of Baghdad, Andrew White. He came to speak to a chapel when I was at university, and he just got back from Baghdad. And he spoke a few times actually, and I think one of the most surprising things about it is he used to talk about how their church, in spite of all the harm, all the hurt, all the genuine evil that they are experiencing under ISIS and under other oppressive forces, he said, we're the happiest place on earth. There was a joy in it. That tension, you could see it in his life. So you want to know a little bit more about it, look up the Bishop of Baghdad, Andrew White, and the story of their church. You can look up Open Doors as well, where you can find out about Christians around the world who are experiencing different kinds of persecution. As C.S. Lewis says of Aslan, Jesus, he's not a tame lion. Becoming an apprentice of the way isn't a comfortable life. It's a lot more exciting than that and a lot harder than that. He doesn't promise us a stable earthly existence. He does say that you might have wandered all over the world to find an answer, but only in him will you find a home. So, Let's stop there. What strikes you about this passage? Have a look at it. Go around it. Just pick out something, even if it's just something seems simple or, not that profound or interesting. But say it anyway. What strikes you about this passage? What sticks out to you? And then once you've all chatted about that, then I'd like you to go around again and say what God might be saying to you in your particular life from this passage. Is there anything that relates to something that you're experiencing or something that you've seen someone else go through? So go through that. And then finally, I'd like you to go again and chat about what adventure is God calling you to. And it doesn't have to be to the other ends of the earth, but what adventure is God calling you to, and what scares you about it? What adventure is he calling to you, and what scares you about it? Again, that tension between the promise of adventure and a home, and also the promise of struggle and challenge. What adventure is he calling you to, and what scares you about it? And then why don't you all pray for one another?